if that's all right.
Great.
Awesome. So hello everyone, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Rebecca Daniel, the director of the nonprofit organisation The Marine Diaries, and also the founder of the Ocean Conservation Club. So if you're not a member of the club yet, you can just click the little greenhouse at the top of the call, and you can join. And today I am speaking to Ian Urbina, who is an investigative journalist, director of the Outlaw Ocean Project, and author of the book The Outlaw Ocean. And I just wanted to give a little shout out to Nina Rossiter for putting us in touch. So she is in the audience. Check out her Artivism work. If you don't follow her, give her a follow on Instagram as well. So Ian, would you like to do a kind of a brief introduction to you?
Sure. Sounds good. And tell me how long. You just want a couple sentences on who I am and what I do?
Yeah, just go for it.
Sure. Yeah. So as you said, I'm a journalist, and for about 17 years I was at the New York Times doing investigative reporting. In the last 5 years at the Times was focused on this series called The Outlaw Ocean, which is about lawlessness at sea, and quite especially kind of looking at human rights, labor, and environmental abuses offshore around the world. That series then sort of became a book after a couple more years of reporting at sea, and then that book became an organization, which is the Outlaw Ocean Project, which is sort of a ProPublica model nonprofit news organization that we produce kind of polished narrative long form magazine style stories and place them in venues around the world.
Awesome. So how did kind of the project progress from the column in the New York Times to the organization that it is today?
So I took 2 years off. I went back out to sea and had this luxury of building my own team around me to do that reporting. And I got spoiled. And I just really enjoyed kind of tackling stories in my own way and cherry picking the ones I do and then having my own folk, sort of squad around me. And then I went back to the newspaper for a year, did a series about ammunition called American Ammo, and then I realized that there were too many good topics that I wanted still to tackle at sea. And so I went out and began talking with some key philanthropic funders, Bloomberg Philanthropy, Schmidt Marine, Technology Partners, that's Google Money, and some others, and said, if you believe in this kind of journalism, which is rapidly disappearing, foreign, international, investigative, long-form journalism, quite especially on the ocean, which is a rarity, then support it. So I got some seed capital to create a team. And now we've grown to 10 staff, and there were a couple of things I wanted to do differently. One was, aside from just tackling this subject matter, I didn't want to do just environmental stories and become an ocean organization. I wanted to really cover stories that were at the intersection of human rights and environment. And number two, I also wanted to break the traditional mold where you take a piece and say you give it to you publish it with the New Yorker or BBC or whomever, Washington Post, and then they own it. I didn't want to do that because I thought if the goal here is to have social impact, then we need more people around the world and a bigger, more diverse audience to see it. So I would self-fund the story, and then I would publish it, and we publish it in these venues, but then we take it back after 2 weeks, a month, and then we translate it into 8 languages, and then we have it published in 40, 45 other venues around the world, developing world and developed world outlets, from The Economist to the largest paper in Venezuela, that also was something very different. And then the third thing we do is we take the stories and try to convert them into something else other than just narrative journalism. So we convert them into music or animation series, video game, podcast, just lots of other different kinds of languages, if you will, metaphorically, so that we can ideally access younger and more diverse audiences that way too.
Yeah, I think what you guys are doing is very kind of unique in the approach that you have, and really, really important in the things that you cover. I definitely don't have very much knowledge in the kind of human side of things, but it is so important, and I think people are kind of becoming a lot more aware of how intricately linked kind of environmental issues and human rights issues are. Just through kind of your type of reporting and people making those links, because generally my background's in science and there isn't much kind of collaboration or crossover between different areas of research and reporting. Everyone kind of fits into their little niche and kind of sticks to that. So I think it's fantastic that you guys kind of are breaking the mold in that way.
I do. I think like the silo problem is often how they refer to it, is pretty acute, and even when it comes to kind of finding solutions. So if you take something like illegal fishing on the one hand, or sea slavery on the other hand, when the series ran in the New York Times, there was a lot of reaction and policy sort of impact that came from it. But the thing that just kept striking me and my editor was that you would have NOAA or Department of State or Department of Labor, sort of all trying to take their piece of what the reporting revealed, and they wouldn't talk to each other. And so you'd have like these pieces of legislation or new policy that would come out, and they would be aimed at the same players, Walmart or CP Foods or tuna ships, on the Pacific, but they would be tackling very different, and the end result was that you be reinventing the wheel every 5 years, because you'd have a big accomplishment in terms of trying to ensure that tuna that's being bought by the U.S. government and supplied to public schools or on military bases no longer is as likely to be caught illegally. But 5 years later, but because the senator and the agency that pushed that through, and kudos to them, never really talked with the folks over in the State Department or that other competing piece of legislation that had to do with the fact that they're trafficked workers on those same vessels. 5 years later, there'd be a new expose that says, "Oh, all those ships that supposedly are Marine Steward, kind of cleared and really doing good stuff, and the good guys. Turns out, there's murder and abuse and rape happening on the ships to the people." So it just seemed really idiotic that you just had such a lack of communication between the different communities, and you had sort of really dire policy repercussions because of that.
Yeah, I think that is just one of the biggest issues about kind of policy making, and it kind of also comes into play when like the communities that are being affected by these issues aren't consulted either, and that kind of happens a lot where government kind of tries to implement something that they think will solve the issue, and actually it makes things worse for local communities or communities that are already like marginalized, which definitely we don't want. But kind of going back to the beginning of your story, what initially kind of inspired you into this kind of reporting and your kind of love for the ocean and human rights issues?
There were a couple of things that pulled me. One was I was a cultural anthropologist before I joined the Times, and I had spent some time actually procrastinating on my dissertation. I'd run away from University of Chicago in cold winter and sort of was going to take 3 months off and try to clear my head. And I went to work on a research ship that was anchored in Singapore, just to try something new. And we never left port, which was really frustrating for paperwork reasons. But it kind of left me there, spending a lot of time in this weird liminal world with this sort of diaspora transient tribe of people called seafarers who were fascinating to me. Like, again, thinking very anthropologically, it was like I had discovered this Amazonian tribe that somehow no one had ever researched, and I, was thinking, gosh, if I could wind the clock back, I would probably do my dissertation on these folks, because they had their own language and their own kind of sort of storytelling and their own kind of strict hierarchies on the vessels and their own codes of conduct and modes of crime and relationship with the environment, and they were really distinct from any workforce I'd ever encountered. So that kind of put the bug in me. I was always interested in the ocean, but I never grew up on sailboats or spending any real time on vessels. I went to the beach during the summer, but what drew me was that demographic of people. And then just journalistically, 10 years, 15, 20 years later, I was at the Times and cooking up, project ideas, and having spent that time with those guys, and it is mostly male world, I knew there to be just incredible narrative and crime and just sort of otherworldly behavior happening out there. And so from a journalistic point of view, I thought, this is virgin snow. This is a realm where if I could get the newspaper to trust me enough and let me, cut me loose and let me go roam the globe and go to some of these places and get on these vessels, I could come back with some pretty epic story of kind of not all bad, but largely extra legal behavior of myriad type.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely kind of otherworldly, like you said. That there's just kind of such a different culture at sea, and I actually kind of managed to spend some time in Indonesia with the Bajau, which you've definitely probably heard of, and they do have that kind of seafaring community, and it's so interesting, and definitely not very many people kind of are aware of or appreciate or understand that way of life. I think being so connected to the ocean or spending that long at sea really kind of changes your mindset, I think.
Yeah, I talk about it. I'm recycling a lot of what's said in the book, so those who've read it will roll their eyes, I suppose. But I do think it is unlike any place I've ever been, and in many ways it's a bit akin to space travel and time travel all bundled up in one, because it's like space travel in the sense that, and I'm not talking about near shore fishing, but more distant water fishing. You get in this spaceship, in this vessel, and you travel impossible distances for freakishly long times, and you're trapped there and you can't kind of get out there, and you are heading into this other realm, and then it's a bit like time travel, just the outlaw ocean realm writ large, in the sense that you encounter things out there you thought were from a bygone era, slavery, piracy, murder with impunity, arms trafficking, what have you, and then I think it's also, to sort of echo your point, I think it's like on a personal, psychological and biological level, you spend a lot of time on a vessel and you really do change your very core chemistry. Land sickness, is a real thing. The inability to reacclimate your inner ear pendulum so that you can stand on stable land and not have what they call sway. I never got seasick. I always got land sick. So when I would go to sea, I would, for whatever reason, my inner ear would adjust pretty quickly, and I wouldn't get sick. But then when I got off the vessel, I would throw up for days and I would feel like I was having bed spins, kind of drunken bed spins, even though I was sober. So it really does, being in this space, your relationship with time, your relationship with light, your relationship with other people, your relationship with communication with people back on land, all these things sort of change, and so does your very biological chemistry. To say nothing of, long stints of seclusion, that has a mental health price, and it's not all bad, but it can be, but it does really make you kind of start to, you get back, to put it bluntly, you get back, and there is a sort of reacclimation that you have to go through to remember how to deal with the pace of modern landlubber life. The amount of interactions you have, the amount of words you exchange with your spouse or your kids, the kind of just the information overload, the speed of regular life that we all live here on land is very different than what you experience if you go for a while offshore.
Yeah, I can imagine it would be kind of, well, you are off grid. It's like going off grid, and going kind of trekking into the jungle or up a mountain and staying there for months and months, and then coming back to technology and social media and like you say, overstimulation with our kind of like fast-paced lifestyles, which I can only imagine is very, very overwhelming. What's the longest you've been at sea? You mentioned quite heavy kind of after effects.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, it's not that long compared to a month and a half is the longest. And to think that a lot of the people I covered were at sea for 2 straight years. Some of the contracts that these guys on merchant vessels or fishing vessels, will last for years. But for me, a month and a half was long enough. Continually, there were times when 3 months, kind of, you come back. So
Oh, sorry, I just lost you there for the last couple of minutes.
Oh, sorry. Did you? What was the last thing? Can you hear me now?
I heard you say you were out there for a month and a half. Some people stay for 2 years, and that was where I lost you.
I think I just kept saying that over and over again. But yeah, a month and a half. You're no worse off for having missed the second part of what I said. No, about a month and a half, and then there were 3-4 month stints of reporting where I was gone for 3 weeks, back for a week, or back for 2 days, then gone. But the sustained period offshore was about a month and a half.
That is a long time. I feel like maybe it would be worse if you kind of were coming back for a day or two and then going back out again, because you're not, like, your body just never gets used to it.
Yeah. You also just, for me, I despise those two week things, because it's not long enough to really become a part of the family on board, and it's long enough though to suffer it, to have to try to acclimate. So those are the hardest.
Yeah, definitely. So have you ever found yourself in a bit of a tricky situation whilst you've been reporting on these kinds of issues that you've been mentioning, lawlessness, human rights, all of that kind of stuff?
Well, that's kind of such a big question. I have to say, you got to read the book. I mean, there's a lot. I don't know how to. I would say
the most tricky situation you found yourself in.
Well, let's see. I would say before recently, Somalia was probably the most dangerous and scary, and that was a situation where we went to Fabio Nascimento, my Brazilian co-reporter, photographer, videographer, and I went to Puntland, which is sort of the Horn of Africa. It's the state of Somalia that faces Yemen, and we got stuck there. We got in trouble there where we we couldn't get out, and we lost our security, and we were told that Al Shabaab, this terrorist group, was kind of headed. We were the only Westerners in this one area, and we were in real trouble. But we got out by the skin on our chinny chin chin, and we're fine. But for the last 48 hours, we were hiding out on a rooftop, kind of wondering whether we be able to get out. And then other smaller, dust ups that in Borneo we were covering the sort of underworld of the sort of underground railroad of anti-trafficking workers that specialize in trying to help fleeing deckhands get away from the port and the captain and bounty hunters that are eager to bring them back to the ship. And we were shadowing one of these guys that does this work, and we got a heads up that there was a deckhand who had just recently escaped and fled and was in hiding on a rubber plantation up in the mountains in Borneo. And so we went to interview him and found him and interviewed him. And halfway through the interview, some guys with guns kind of showed up and in not so polite terms told us the interview was over. So it's things like that. But two points I always rush to make on this question is one, the truth is it's the risk in this kind of reporting is less people wanting to do us harm, because there are a lot of disincentives to do harm to Westerners, in these settings, or anyone for that matter, because they're you have to talk your way onto the ship anyway. The true risk in these contexts are the conditions. It's getting sick and you can't get back to shore. It's really dangerous, huge industrial equipment. It's slip and fall. It's fall overboard. It's getting an infection that you really can't manage. And these places are insanely dirty. Getting bitten by rats. These sorts of things are actually the bigger risk. And then the other thing I say probably should lead with this is any risk I encounter is a fraction. It like pales in comparison to the risk faced by both the people that I bring, so the in-country fixers and translators and these folks who actually have to stay there after I fly home. And those folks actually are the types who need to be extremely careful, because the folks that we report on might not be happy with what happens after we report on them, and they'll come for the fixer or the translator. And then the real risk, the foremost risk, is the people we're interviewing. So those folks are invariably undocumented and from developing countries, and kind of the most vulnerable of people on the planet. And in the very act of giving us their story, they put a target on their back, and they're much easier to do harm to those people and get away with it than if you come after someone like me.
That's really interesting. I would never have thought of, maybe getting sick or an infection or something like that as being more risk of, harm from these, people, pirates or corrupt kind of people on board and stuff like that. So that's really interesting. So some of your recent work has been kind of looking at the issues with aquaculture, and some people might be aware of the fact that aquaculture isn't necessarily a fits-all solution to overfishing, and can be done well. Majority of it, there are a lot of other kind of environmental issues associated with it. One of these is kind of the issue with farmed carnivorous fish being fed with fish meal and fish oil, which is generally produced from wild caught fish. I think about a quarter of all the fish that is caught at sea kind of ends up as FMFO. Um, and some of your recent work has been kind of exposing other impacts associated with fish farming in Gambia. Would you like to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, you summed it up well. Obviously, you know the topic well. I mean, I think um, the sort of already known and big picture concerns around aquaculture or fish farming are many of the same concerns that emerged around big agro. You know, when you started penning large amounts of animals, be they chicken, pigs or cattle, you know, you had, you know, waste problems, you had emissions problems, you had health problems, you had industry wanting to fatten them up faster, get the market quicker. So you're pumping them with all sorts of stuff, including antibiotics, because of all the health problems, and therefore you have downstream health concerns for the consumers, et cetera, right? And water distribution problems. So these same sorts of categorical concerns emerge with aquaculture. You're penning large amounts of animals, this in this case fish, in near shore pens or on land pools, and you know you got to figure out what to do about their emissions and their waste and all that, right? But then, like you said, second category is you got to feed them. What are you going to feed them with? You want to fatten them up. You need to get them protein sources. So you know, industry began using the very thing that they were supposedly trying to protect in raising fish on land, namely wild caught stocks, to feed the fish on land. So that was idiotic and you know unsustainable. Then you know, then you have the developing world problem of that's not distinct to this industry, but you've got you know China as the new superpower doing the same thing that the U.S. and Europe does now and did previously in its climb to becoming a you know superpower. And one of those things is kind of the double-edged sword of development dollar investment. You know, so foreign capital comes in this case, Chinese capital, in this case, in the form of a multi-billion-dollar global program called Belt and Road Initiative, and you know the Chinese are sopping up all the bridge and school and hospital and port and infrastructure projects in Latin America and Africa that used to be grabbed at by the Americans and the Europeans. Now it's the Chinese, and those deals are typically one part kind of shrewd capitalist business transactions and one part, you know, development, and I put quotes around that term, agenda. And, you know, to the extent that they are legitimately development dollars, in this case, for example, in Gambia, the smallest African nation or smallest nation in continental Africa, you know, you have this industry of fish meal, you know, companies coming in. Senegal, Mauritania, Gambia, West African, you know, has seen 14, I think, fish meal factories come in the last 10 years. And, you know, it's for Gambia and these other countries, like it's attractive because, especially in Gambia, you have a country that's coming out of a pretty repressive and financially strapped autocratic government of a decade and some, and now you have a newly, somewhat ostensibly democratic set of players in there, and they're looking for money to try to, you know, grow, improve schools, hospitals, roads, like get the country up and running, deal with COVID, and you know, investment's hard to be found, and so Chinese come along and say, look, we've got a factory we can set up for you, and you'll get tax base, and you'll get jobs, and we'll build a road from here to there, you know, to bring our trucks, but also your people can benefit from it. And this is a good thing for you. And in some ways it might be, but the fine print and the hidden costs, you know, are the ones that show up later after the thing's been signed, and they can be way costlier than the benefits. So in this case, fish meal smells terrible when you make it. So now you have a bottoming out of the tourist industry, because just the whole coast smells god awful because you're boiling tons and tons of fish. And You also have the main source of sustenance for the local community is this fish called bonga fish, and kind of once plentiful, so plentiful that you would get it for free at the market, and now this is the fish that the foreign boats are pulling out of the water in unsustainable amounts to grind it up and pelletize it and make it into protein pellets, rather than putting it on the kind of small artisanal female-led fishmonger tables near shore where they buy and sell fish to locals. It's all getting rerouted to the factory, and so you just have a destabilizing of the kind of a dietary destabilizing of the source of protein. You have a social structure destabilizing of the women are out of work. The fishermen are doing pretty well for the short run because they're selling their fish at a nice profit to the factory, but it's not sustainable for them because the stock is going to collapse at the rate that they're pulling them out. So there are lots of reasons why this is just a really, and of course the tax dollars and the road and the jobs, those are all farces. The road never got built in Gambia. This is just like sewing and so many Dickensian industries of yore. Like, it is not an industry that employs a lot of people, and so it looks good on paper, but it's mechanized, and there are very few real jobs that come out of it. And the high skilled ones go to Chinese that are imported. The medium skilled ones go to Senegalese that are imported, and then a couple guys from Gambia might land a couple jobs, cleaning this or that, but it's not really an employer of note. And so so there's a lot of sleight of hand, and there's a lot of deep problems in that same old development story that we've consumed so many years before, and that's what's going on in Gambia with fish meal.
And wasn't there also some kind of contamination as well from the kind of effluent from this processing plant?
Yeah, I mean, and again, at least in my rendering, if you're going to believe me, it fits within this larger category of, you have a power disparity between the Chinese government and the companies that's trying to get this deal signed, and then the local government that's trying to do right by its people, voters and taxpayers, and so in this case, you have a Golden Lead, which was just one of the factories. It's supposed to not be polluting the air and polluting the nearby water, both the ocean at its front and the huge biodiverse lagoon at its side. But, the ability of the Gambian government to actually police the agreement is relatively non-existent, right? Gambia doesn't have its own vessels, so it can't actually check the health of those fish stocks along its shore. So it's kind of got to take the fishing industry, foreign fishing industry, foreign industrial fishing industry at its word when it, says how much it's pulling out of the water. And then with regard to where the factory is pumping its effluent, its waste materials, well, it's usually only after the fact that anyone figures out that wasn't being done properly. And after the fact in this case was after this incredibly diverse lagoon adjacent to the factory was obliterated. It was ruined by, and there was a huge die-off. And then you have this interesting to me at least, political story whereby you have these young people in Gunjur, in this town, village area near the factory, that are, inspired by the fact that they have a new guy in power and a new administration in power, and they've got some democratic rhetoric and it's a new moment, and so they're going to exert their free speech, they're going to exert their kind of political will to sort of really hammer the company that has ruined its coastline and polluted its air and savaged its local lagoon. And so these guys start organizing and become, protesters and environmentalists. And the secret police of old, the repressive apparatus that used to be, the autocratic guy that just got tossed, starts rearing its head again and paying folks visits at night and arresting folks. So all of this stuff comes into play. and is not to the benefit of the Gambians, unfortunately.
And you mentioned kind of that there was this big die off from the local kind of lagoon. Do you know if there's any kind of people working on trying to figure out if that will ever recover?
No is my short answer. I have not been. I keep in touch with the main scientist who's in the story in the New Yorker, uh, and if I had to guess, I would say I doubt much is happening in the way of organized effort to restore that, just because there isn't the money or the people, um, to correct that problem. I think they're in a defensive posture in which they're just trying to prevent worse harm from occurring. They're not really. I have not seen any real ability or inclination by local players to start fixing old harm. They're just trying to prevent new harm, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, that's such a shame, but I guess we kind of need the pollution to stop first as well before trying even to restore anything. And you mentioned obviously this kind of corruption of ministers and government. And part of your work out there involved a kind of investigation with Sea Shepherd. What did that involve?
Gambia, like a lot of developing nations, coastal developing nations, has no boats, and so, like I said before, it can't really patrol its own waters or enforce its own laws. So Sea Shepherd has, I think, in recent years, Sea Shepherd kind of has made a campaign of working with a bunch of coastal nations in this same regard, where they bring a ship or two of theirs to the country and bring local fisheries or Navy or Coast Guard officers from the country on board and train them in, how to do at sea boardings and how to do sort of law enforcement work on the water. And, this is one part PR for Sea Shepherd, one part legitimate training of local folk, and one part PR on behalf by Sea Shepherd on behalf of these coastal nations to try to get attention on the dire need, in these places. So like the Gambia story is a perfect example where a piece in the New Yorker, gets a fairly wide audience, and then there are folks in the philanthropic and development community on the better end, that say, oh wow, this is I didn't know about this. This is a really serious issue, and we should maybe invest a bit in trying to help Gambia to patrol its own waters or whatever. So it's I think Sea Shepherd's been doing this maybe 3 years now in half dozen different countries. These sorts of patrols. So critics say, and critics, there always are critics, but critics say, well, this sort of taxi service that Sea Shepherd is engaged in is a real short-lived kind of flash in the pan, unsustainable way to try to counter this problem. And guilty as charged. I mean, I think that's true. It's not. Sea Shepherd has to leave at some point, and then all the illegal folks just come back in the water and continue as they were, because they know that the patrol boat's gone. But these other goals that I mentioned, training, onshore folks to be more fluent in what the issues are and how to do something about them, and then also trying to get the world to pay a bit more attention to these places and these issues. I think those are really legitimate accomplishments that come out of the campaign.
Definitely, and I think from reading the article about this, one of the kind of main reasons for the arrests that were made on shore was a kind of lack of data being recorded, and some of your other stories actually include kind of like open access data, such as kind of vessels that are in violation of UN sanctions. What do you hope will kind of happen with that data, or who do you hope will use it?
I mean, the organization Global Fishing Watch, which is sort of a Oceania Google offspring outfit, sort of specializes in public access, leveraging, translating kind of data of various sorts that are aimed at trying to get more transparency, accountability on the ocean space of all sorts of crimes, illegal fishing, dumping of oil, arms trafficking, but quite especially more environmental concerns. So I'm a huge fan of the work they do because they are really unique in filling a desperate need. I think that they largely rely on AIS, which is it's actually a collision proofing, data source that's open access and readily available, and you can use it in the way they do, right, to see who's doing what out there. The problem is you can turn it off, AIS off, and the bad guys know that, and they turn it off when they want to do nefarious stuff. So I do think there's probably going to have to be some evolution in the whole leveraging of data so as to apply more governance on the ocean game, right? I think Global Fishing Watch has moved the ball hugely downfield, but a lot of other players. There's a really interesting Norwegian company called KSAT that is putting a lot of affordable satellites up into space and sort of talking with the Norwegian government about subsidizing the making of that data more free, for journalists and NGOs and whatnot. And that those satellites would actually see the ships whether they want to be seen or not, whether they turn off their AIS or not. That would be a game changer, because like I said, AIS is gameable, spoofable. So, but yeah, I think that one, there needs to be more sustain. And this is a very self-serving comment because this is what my organization aims to do, is just sort of put a sustained flow of really interesting narrative, investigative, hard-hitting stories out there in the global press about these issues. That is, in my view, extremely important, because if we don't have more reporting, good reporting happening out there, then taxpayers and voters and lawmakers and companies and all these various stakeholders will just kind of forget and stop caring. So that's essential. But I think you also need more organizations like Global Fishing Watch out there that are kind of almost the intellectual arms dealers, if you will, for this fight. You need more of them out there that are equipping people like me with more tools so that we can go after these topics.
I love that phrase, the intellectual arms dealers. Fantastic. So you kind of mentioned at the beginning that part of your work is kind of converting the written form of journalism into other kind of narrative forms, audio, games, podcasts, documentary films. And one of the things that you recently launched is a kind of musical project. I'm going to open it up to questions. So if anyone wants to raise their hand, I'll bring you up. But as people are coming up, if you'd like to answer that question, Ian, so to talk about the new musical project.
So I have a 17-year-old son, and he won't read anything I write, be it in the New Yorker or the New York Times or anywhere. And irks the hell out of me. So, my thought was, well, there are a lot of 17-year-olds out there, be they in Taiwan or Caracas or, Havana or wherever, Amsterdam, and they're not reading the New Yorker or the New York Times. And so how do we deal with that problem? How do we get these stories to a younger demographic? And the thought was, well, why don't we go to where they are, TikTok, Facebook, Spotify, YouTube, etc. And is there any way we could kind of figure out a way to not compromise the journalism too much, but nonetheless get access to those people at that watering hole. And so that's one of the ambitions of the music project, was to get at a different audience more effectively, get at them on a different set of platforms, so Spotify, Pandora, Apple Play, etc. Bring the journalism to those platforms, and then maybe even get into them, to push this metaphor dangerously far, like in a different orifice, like rather than through their eyes to their head, why not go through their ear to their heart, right? So take the journalism, make music, make it evocative, emotional, creative, and sort of hook those people, grab their curiosity, and then use that to pull them over to the story. So what we do is we reach out to musicians, hip hop, electronic, classical, what have you, ask them to make a album, 5-track album in their own style, aimed at their own audience, but based on the stories we produce, sort of songs that are with or without words, but kind of inspired by the stuff in the book or the subsequent reporting. We make a sound archive that pulls from all the 7-8 years of footage interesting sounds, machine gun fire in Somalia or chanting Cambodian deckhands, what have you, really interesting textured sounds. We hand that over to the musicians and say, hey, you're a chef, these are some ingredients. You can use them or not, whatever, your call. But these are some cool ingredients that actually come from the reporting that you can embed in the songs. And that's Secretary of State John Kerry, at the UN. It's me giving a radio interview, it's whatever. And then we say, make us an album, get it back to us, we'll publish it. 50% of what's made on the album goes back to you. 50% of what's made on the album, the other 50% comes to the nonprofit to fund more journalism. And that's the other part, is get audience in a different way, a different audience, and then also could we nickel and dime our way through this music thing to a sustainable, financially sustainable model of extremely expensive reporting. Might get paid $8,000 by the New Yorker for a 5,000-word story, and that piece cost $108,000 to produce. And that's why you don't see this reporting, even in the New York Times. But we're trying to find scrappy other ways to fund the journalism, so we're not just living off the dole of Bloomberg philanthropy, who's great, but we can't forever be. So we're trying to find lots of different ways to get average folk and musicians and listeners to nickel and dime us towards doing, 10 stories a year.
Yeah, definitely. The more kind of stories you can cover, the better, for sure. And if anyone listening hasn't checked out the Outlaw Ocean Music Project, then definitely do. It's on their website, on Spotify, and yeah, you should be able to find all of the links. And thank you so much, Ian, for telling your story. And I just wanted to ask you a kind of final question, if there was anything that you wanted to maybe point people towards, or promote, or something that is coming up soon, that you wanted to mention.
I mean, we're a couple of months away from this piece that will be for the New Yorker and Frontline and some others, about Libya. I'll be, but that's a ways off. I mean, I would just in general say, we really do depend on support in small levels from average readers, and the way to do that most directly is go to the website and a little annoying thing pops up that says subscribe to Substack. You'll get it for free if that's preferable. Everyone gets the same stuff, but there's the request for, hey, if you could pay $5 a month, that would really help us. So that's one way for people to support what we're doing. But again, sign up even if you don't want to pay, and the bigger audience and family we have of readers, the better. So that would be my only plea.
Yeah, definitely. Anyone listening, sign up to the Outlaw Ocean Project's newsletter. And like Ian mentioned, you can just find that on the website. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Ian, for chatting to me today and answering everyone's questions. It's been really inspiring to hear about all of the work that you're doing, and looking forward to seeing what comes next.
Yeah, it was great meeting you, and thank you for ushering me into the
world of Clubhouse.
Clubhouse, yeah. I'm no longer a Clubhouse virgin.
Yeah.
I've experienced this thing I've heard about, so thanks for bringing me along.
No worries. And well, yeah, if you want to do another call, then definitely happy to do that at any point. And yeah, if anyone's interested in hearing more kind of ocean related calls, if you join the Ocean Conservation Club, I generally try and do a call once a week on a Monday at the same time. So yeah, just follow the club and you should get notifications. But thanks everyone for listening, and thank you, Ian, again. Bye.
Bye-bye.